There's no world where it's okay or acceptable for a parent to be like, thanks for publicly shitting on your brother for me. It made me feel so good. And obviously that's the goal here. That's the whole point of all of this. And so like, high five. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about welcome to Plathville and or the Plath family, mostly because I want to make a video talking about family dysfunction and family system stuff. I've gotten a lot of requests from y'all to talk about like family roles and things like that. So regardless of whether you have seen Welcome to Plathville or not, in my opinion, this video is more about like using Welcome to Plathville as an example to educate about family dysfunction and like what family dysfunction really looks like. So I think regardless of whether you've seen the show, hopefully this will be useful to you. All of that said, I also want to be transparent. I'm not really feeling the best today. I'm feeling a little sick today, so I'm slightly less energetic than I normally am. That's why it's not that I'm not excited to be making this video. My body is just revolting. So let's get into the show. I have a couple of clips from the show, and I want to talk to you guys also about like some key themes that showed up, especially in terms of like why families will look or be dysfunctional, and like how to spot that, how to deal with that. So let's talk about that. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk to you about is a concept called triangulation. I think we briefly covered this in the emotional incest video, actually, but a lot of people who are familiar with psychology stuff will know about the term triangulation, but in case you're not familiar, essentially what happens in like the therapy language, they use the term dyad, but it's a relationship between two people. If that relationship is unstable or has conflict or there's like beef going on there, it's not uncommon for there to be a third person who gets kind of like roped into the situation to quite literally stabilize this relationship in a triangle, right? In theory, it makes sense. This is not always a bad thing, to be clear. It is possible to have triangulation in a sort of healthy way when we have like healthy boundaries and everybody's consenting to this. That's not what we're talking about today. More so, we're talking about the problematic aspects of this. One of the most common examples of this is between two parents who have beef with each other and them recruiting one of their children to be an emotional confidant, right? Again, I think we talked about this in the emotional incest video. I'll link that below in case you are interested, but this can happen between a parent, treating their child like a confidant to essentially discuss like, if your other parent has a substance abuse issue or if there's just like a, general conflict in the relationship, treating the child as like sort of an emotional dumping ground for all of that stuff, which to be clear is very traumatizing. If this has happened to you, please know that you're very valid in feeling how you feel, because this genuinely really does fucked up things to a person's attachment and their relationships and like all of that stuff. We'll talk about that later. But for the purpose of talking about triangulation, there's a couple of other ways that this can happen. This can happen between siblings, right? This can also happen in like other groups, like friends and coworkers and whatever. But for today's purposes, it can happen between siblings. It can also happen between siblings and a parent, right? So if there's beef between two siblings, we can involve a parent. Ideally, in this situation, obviously, parents who are like healthy people are able to set better boundaries around this. But the reason that I bring that up is because that's exactly what happened. We're using some examples from Plathville today to illustrate like why that dynamic can become problematic really quickly. It goes without saying that this is a problematic behavior. I don't think that's surprising to anyone. Like I just said, it can be very much traumatizing to be on the receiving end of, but within the greater family system, this also creates a lack of trust and sometimes a hypervigilance where like we know that people are talking shit either to or about each other, and this creates this kind of weird, catty, secretive environment that's very destabilizing. The other problem with this though is that it will first of all hinder your communication, right? So there's usually like a lack of communication, if not like poor communication at the best. That's not how I wanted to word that, but it's fine. It will also like de-incentivize conflict resolution, essentially. So instead of dealing head on, right, having the like difficult and, somewhat uncomfortable conversation directly with the person that we have issues with and hopefully moving through that conflict, we're like circumventing doing that. And so this can become a problem in a family system where like systemically as a pattern, we're just like never resolving any conflict and instead just operating under this system of like continually triangulating new people and never talking directly to the person. This is why I said it's very destabilizing, even though it's an attempt to stabilize a problematic relationship between two people. Actually, all it does is further destabilize the entire family system. We saw this happen to Olivia with like basically every relationship in the Plath family, like all of the siblings especially. And I have some examples for you. I have some clips that I want to show you. So let's talk about that. Before we talk about that though, I want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, which is Dipsy. Y'all might not know actually that I used to be a pretty avid reader back in the day, but sitting down with a paper book has become increasingly challenging for me. And so I'm really excited that Dipsy's audio stories have been a vehicle for me to get back into that and to like have some greater leisure time with myself. For those of you that don't know, Dipsy is an app that's filled with hundreds of short and spicy audio stories that uses immersive soundscapes and realistic characters to really bring stories to life. Dipsy has everything from Regency era romance to fairy and werewolf smut. So regardless of what you're into, Dipsy has got you covered. New content also gets added every week. So in between listening to your faves over and over again, you can also get lost in something new. And I think Dipsy's modern approach to romance is such a game changer because the audio and the stories are so high quality and engaging. And I really want y'all to experience that. So for listeners of the show, Dipsy is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipsystories.com/Mickey. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to DIPSEA stories.com/Mickey, dipsystories.com/Mickey. Thank you so much to Dipsy for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. Okay, so the thing that I want to draw your attention to in regards to the Plath family specifically is that the problem with these types of triangulation, especially in conflict avoidant families, is that when the triangulated party is being confided in by one half of this unstable dyad, but then that half of the person ends up either like towing the family line and sort of going back to this very conflict avoidant, like we're not verbalizing our feelings kind of environment, or the unstable dyad like works out their stuff, then the person who was triangulated is often left on the outside, just very, very much like hung out to dry kind of energy. And like this is what we see happen to Olivia again and again, right? This is also especially common in families where the person who's being triangulated is like an in-law or is in some way like part of the family, but like on that like boundary that's like technically family, but sort of not. And so there's this very strange dynamic that's going on where there's like multiple layers of like loyalty and family dysfunction, and especially like the roles that get occupied in problematic and dysfunctional family systems. All of that plays into this dynamic that again ends up being actually pretty fucking traumatizing for the person who got roped into this conflict that wasn't theirs in the first place. Really quick, I know I told you I'm going to show you a clip from the show. I am going to show you a clip, but just one more thing before we watch this clip. The other thing I want you to be aware of, especially in regards to like, how do we deal with this, with dysfunctional families? It's important to level set about like what actually is happening when somebody pulls this 180, where they used to be triangulating you and confiding in you about their problem with this other person, and then they return to their problematic or dysfunctional family of origin. Oftentimes what's happening here is that there's a good amount of shame at play. You can see this, I think, pretty clearly in what happens between Olivia and Micah and Mariah, respectively, where, especially in the early seasons, I'm going to show you a clip in a second about Olivia and Mariah bonding and a lot of the discussion about how, like, you know, I saw these things in this person and like want to be supportive of them because she's expressed like X, Y, and Z frustrations with Kim, right? Mariah expressed these frustrations with Kim. I got distracted, so I sort of lost my train of thought a little bit, but essentially what's happening here is that there's usually a lot of shame at play in regards to having disclosed like your grievances or your frustrations with this other half of your unstable dyad, right? We see this, again, I think pretty transparently playing out between Olivia and Micah and Mariah, where like there are these complaints and these frustrations that are voiced on behalf of Micah and Mariah to Olivia about Kim that later end up being, I think, a source of shame and guilt for these kids. And so the 180 that gets pulled is in turning around and being like, it was you, right? You are the one who made me say all of these things. You're the one who like brainwashed me to think all these terrible things about this person that I did in fact have an unstable relationship with to begin with. But because in these dysfunctional family systems, there's very much, we're going to talk about secrecy in a second, but there's very much an unspoken expectation that we don't talk shit about each other, that we don't air our dirty laundry, especially with people who are like on the outside. This creates a lot of shame and guilt. And so there's a desire to rationalize the behavior. And so I think that's just helpful to know. We're going to talk later about like how to deal with this and like what to do if you find yourself on the receiving end of any of these behaviors. But I think it's important for people to know this because when it's happening to you, it feels very destabilizing and like very, the phrase that comes to mind for me a lot is like very snake bitten, being like, I don't understand, right? Like we had this shared understanding where like you sought me out to talk about your frustrations with this person, but now all of a sudden I'm the fucking asshole. Like that doesn't make any sense and it's very confusing. There's usually a pretty strong feeling of betrayal for folks, and especially if you're somebody who has struggled with people-pleasing stuff, who has struggled with feeling a sense of obligation around caretaking or around like emotional like absorption for other people, this can create a feeling of like, did I do the wrong thing? Like, was I not being kind enough, or was I being mean, or was I being shitty? And like, no, this is why it's important to talk about family dynamics and like make the unspoken spoken, because when we're operating from this like implied understanding, or this unspoken understanding rather, there's all of these complex layers of different things that are happening within this family system that feel very confusing and like very destabilizing to be on the receiving end of. So let's watch this clip. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. All right, let's watch this clip.
For Ethan and I, we didn't think a whole lot of things through for ourselves. And I wish we had. And so I like hearing you guys' perspective of where you are.
That's one thing that I've tried to learn to do more, is think a scenario through before you do.
And you guys can learn from us. Like, we've made mistakes, and you can look at our relationship and you can say, I don't want that. Like, that's totally fine. You can learn from us.
Honestly, y'all have been like the best role models, like as in like every relationship struggles and stuff like that. Being able to watch you guys mature together and stuff like that's just been relieving.
We're a family. We all make mistakes. It's what we do with them.
I'm just so glad I have both of you as siblings. I consider you my sister.
I am your sister. Yeah.
That I want to contrast with something from later in the season.
Honestly, she's always hated the way we grew up. She's always talked crap. And Ethan I really feel like he's absorbed all of that. And
And it's really knocked his confidence down. He believes it now.
Yeah, you know what it's called? It's called brainwashing.
Brainwashing.
And that's what's happened to him.
Olivia has said a bunch of things about my parents for years, and it's only gotten worse. Got to the point where lies are being told. I personally want to do my part in making things right.
So we're going to come back to this clip again and again, because there's a couple of things for us to unpack here, but that's the part that I want to draw your attention to. This is why I said the thing that I said about like the guilt and the shame and this desire to pull this 180 in order to rationalize this behavior, right? Not only do we have the word brainwashing being used in order to put Olivia in this position of scapegoat, but we also have all of this rhetoric and this language about how like she's always been, you know, a shit talker who's really mean. Never mind that we literally just watched a clip of Olivia and Ethan talking about like we're family and everybody makes mistakes and that's fine and it's just what you do with them. And this affirmation from Micah and Mariah about like you're our sibling, you know, you're our family, like we really consider you part of our family, blah, 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 all of this stuff, right? Like this really sharp contrast is important to pay attention to, again, because the thing that Mariah said is it's part of my desire is to make this right. Right? To me, this really seems like the familial role of like it's your job to placate your parents, right? This is a thing that we see happen a lot in dysfunctional families where the egos of primary caregivers get uplifted as the thing that matters the most. And so if you notice this about your family system and you feel this pressure to like fix it, to be the person who intervenes and to be the person, or you have been the person who's been thrust into this role of like soothing and placating and fixing and like unruffling everybody's feathers, it's very valid for you to be upset about that. It's very valid for you to need to do some healing around that. And it's also very valid to need to draw a line in the sand at some point about how this dysfunctional family system is not working for you anymore, because that's not a healthy or okay role to be, especially forcing, like for parents to be forcing children into. Really quick before we move on to the topic of secrecy and those kind of things, this is also why I want to talk in this video about how, in my opinion, in these dysfunctional family systems, when we talk about like the Plath family, for example, and sort of like use these situations as an example to educate about dysfunctional families, this is why it's important to keep in mind that ultimately the people who are perpetrating the harm here are usually the parents, right? While I mean, if you want to know my personal opinions about the Plath family, Aaron and I talked about it on the pod. We have a podcast, by the way, in case you didn't know, so link below. But it is important to kind of level set and like recenter the focus on the people who are perpetrating all of this harm, which in this case is the parents, right? It's usually the parents in a family system because they're the folks who have all of the power, right? They're the people who set up a lot of the family dynamics. And when parents, for whatever reason, for any like variety of different reasons that they find themselves in this, kind of dysfunctional setup, when they're the ones who perpetrate or push these roles onto their kids, those are the people who are creating harm. And so while we can have beef like between siblings where, somebody did something fucked up or somebody said something that was really mean or somebody threw somebody under the bus in order for the approval or the validation of our parents, while this sucks and it is important to hold accountability for that and to be receptive so that we can grow, it's also important that we be clear that the reason that folks find themselves in this environment is because the parents are doing things that they should not be doing to their kids. They're setting up this dynamic where essentially like love and acceptance are conditional and are being doled out contingent on your ability to toe the family line and to like parrot the values that the parents have set forth for you. And so also know if you're a person who has like struggled with feelings of shame or self-judgment about having behaved in a way that like now as an adult maybe you don't feel super great about, please know it's okay for you to like move through that. It's important to take accountability and like apologize and all of those things. And also, again, the people who pushed you into like this very crabs in a bucket scenario are ultimately the ones that own a lot of the accountability for how that shook out. Okay, so that sort of brings us tangentially to the second thing that I want to talk to you about today, which is this concept of secrecy. This is really, really common in these dysfunctional family systems. Also, it's often like shorthand referred to in the therapy world as the don't talk rule. There are a couple of rules that are like pretty universally repeated when we talk about dysfunctional family systems. Don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel are like usually the most commonly repeated ones. I think they kind of go hand in hand personally for our purposes today. The don't talk one is most relevant. Essentially what this means is that this expectation exists within the family system that we don't talk about our issues with anybody outside of the family, right? We talked about this earlier. It's very much the like we don't air our dirty laundry thing. There's a lot of pressure that gets heaped upon folks within the family system to like shut the fuck up and like pretend like there's nothing happening, right? It's very much the don't feel thing also. This is why I said I think they go together. Don't tell anybody about the problems that we have within our family unit. Don't get upset about it. You're not allowed to feel how you feel about it. And you're also not supposed to trust that anything will be the same or that you can expect things to be consistent and stable because it's all very chaotic and all over the place and it's very, very overwhelming. The thing about this, I think it goes without saying that this is problematic, right? But the thing about this that's especially insidious is that first of all, it's often used as a means to cover up abuse, right? This is a way to gaslight, quite literally, family members into co-signing and or turning a blind eye to abuse and also to not advocating for themselves when they are the ones who are in fact being abused. This also breeds a codependency and it discourages individuation from the family of origin. We've talked about this on the channel before. I think. If I can find the video that we talked about it in, I'll put it up there. But we've talked about how important it is for people as they mature into adults to individuate from their family of origin, meaning that they become their own individual autonomous person who is capable of making decisions about their wants, their needs, their values, their interests, the things that matter to them, where they want their life to go, all of these sort of overarching things. It's normal. It's healthy for you to move through a stage of development where there are going to be parts of our childhood and our family of origin that we take with us. Obviously, the things that were good or valuable or helpful. And we should have the freedom, we should have encouragement actually from your family of origin to be like, it's okay, find what works for you. Like think through the things that you want, right? Your life does not have to look the way that ours did. Raising a family, it doesn't have to look the way that ours did. And in dysfunctional family systems where there is this, we don't talk about or to anyone outside of the unit, there's a really strong push to like not just stay close to the family of origin and be in the family of origin first and foremost, but also to not think very deeply about values, beliefs, and like those kind of overarching like North Star values kind of stuff. Don't think about those things. Just take ours, absorb our family's values as your own, because if you develop values, beliefs, wants, needs that aren't explicitly ours that we've instructed you to have, that's a betrayal. That means that you're labeling and judging our family values as being bad, and so therefore you're betraying, again, the ego of the primary caregivers within this family system. See how this all kind of revolves around like the ego and like the reputation and the judgment of the parental figures. This is why I said it's important to place responsibility with the folks who are heaping the abuse. There's two more things that I want to encourage you to be aware of before we talk about these clips like relevant to the Plath family specifically. The first of which being that this behavior can also be weaponized sometimes to coerce people into silence, right? If you tell so-and-so or anybody about X, Y, or Z, then I will tell everybody about this time that you A, B, or C. This is also why I said it's important to be kind and like, have an attitude of like some, forgiveness with yourself, that we will behave sometimes in this crabs in a bucket environment where like, again, your, literal value and worth and sense of belonging is being held hostage by a dysfunctional family system, that sometimes that causes people to behave in ways that aren't great, right? This causes infighting amongst siblings, especially, and for there to be this like very crabs in a bucket mentality. That's bad. Obviously, that sucks. generally speaking, we don't want to be like uplifting that as like that's totally fine. Like, of course, that's not what I'm saying. And also in these family systems where we weaponize this sense of shame of like, oh yeah, well, this one time you talk shit about your sister and I know that you're being really fucking mean to her and you're doing X, Y, and Z, that can be weaponized to coerce people to not just be silent within the family system, but also to stay within this dysfunctional family system, which fucking sucks. The truth is that it is okay for people to have done shitty things so long as we're willing to take accountability for that, so long as we're willing to be open to make amends for that, and so long as we're willing to move through the growth that's required in order for us to not live there and to continue to be that person who uplifts those behaviors is like just a totally normal and okay thing to do. If that is what you need in order to move out of a dysfunctional family. I mean, I think you deserve that, like generally, but especially if that's what you need to move out of a dysfunctional family system, it's really, really important that people have the freedom and the like non-judgmental environment to be honest that like it's okay to have done something that wounded someone, again, so long as we're like doing the things, you get it. Okay, the last thing that I want to draw your attention to is that this behavior, this like we don't talk about Bruno. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to before we watch this clip is that this behavior, this very like we don't talk to outsiders thing, first of all, is like weaponized to create an environment of shame and fear, but it also often will lead to more conflict actually within the family system that then gets sort of circularly blamed on the people who speak to folks outside of the family system. This happens with Ethan and Olivia specifically. I think it will be more clear once I show you the clip. Let me show you the clip and then we'll come back actually. Let's do that.
The way I see that is she was using basically a made-up story to validate her big emotions. She has felt this way about our family, about you and Dad, and she was like, I just have all this hate and anger that I'm spewing towards them, and I need to make myself feel valid. That makes me so mad because I sat there by her side for years saying, you are valid. You can feel however you want to feel. But I will not tolerate lies being told. I will not tolerate somebody just then going off the deep end saying, you know, like, you have every right not to like a person. That's okay. And you have every right to be like, oh, their values or their beliefs or whatever don't line up with mine and I don't want to associate with that. That's okay. But it's not okay to try and make the whole world or a whole family feel the same way.
Well, it's just relationally destructive. You know, that approach is very relational.
And I see that now, and
see
that's
it.
why I choose not to have a relationship with her anymore.
Okay, the reason I showed you this clip is because what I said earlier about how the conflict that already exists within the family system will often then get blamed on the person who spoke outside of the family about the issues. This is what I'm saying. The truth is that this conflict, this issue has existed within this family, I mean, probably like since its inception, I would assume, for a good while, right? And especially this is a conflict and a disagreement that predates Olivia's involvement with the family. However, because Olivia and Ethan, especially in this case, were the people to speak outwardly to like the rest of the world in this case about the problems that exist within the family, now all of a sudden, Ethan and Olivia are the reason that we have these problematic relationships. Olivia's, public statement about this issue with the credit card fraud and all this stuff is very relationally destructive. That's why our family is struggling. That's why we have such fucked up relationships. That's why our family is falling apart because of these people who violated the sacred rule of like, don't talk about our family issues with people outside of the family. This is what I want to draw your attention to because again, when you are on the receiving end of this, it makes you feel like you're fucking crazy because when people weaponize this like secrecy to blame you and then blame problems that have already existed on you, if you try to defend yourself, if you try to draw attention to this, it can feel really overwhelming and again, destabilizing because the family system is going to continue to toe this line of like, no, that's like what we're saying is true, right? You're wrong, we're right. And so there's like no winning in this situation. We're going to talk a little bit later about moving goalposts and how confusing and upsetting that is. But this situation is just, I think, important to draw attention to because again, when we're on the receiving end of this, there is a feeling for a lot of folks, especially those of us who are moving out of the golden child role, the like family hero role, the caretaker, the placater role. There can be a feeling of like deep betrayal and distrust for ourselves of like, I am betraying our family system, right? It is my fault. I am being shitty or mean or hurtful or traumatizing to my family system. And that's not true. That's not what it is at all. Okay, one other thing that I want to draw your attention to, I have another clip for you in this section, just to illustrate the point of like how this plays out in family systems when we're weaponizing the relationships with one another to reinforce this expectation of secrecy. There is a moment that Kim speaks to her kids in a way that's like really alarming, first of all. But also what I think helps to illuminate this point. So let me show you that.
But I have to tell you, when you two and Lydia and Isaac got together and came up with a group statement and posted it online on my behalf, I cried really hard. That made me feel so good that somebody's standing up for me. So thank you.
This is why I showed you this clip. In this moment, Kim is literally celebrating and reinforcing or encouraging her kids for having shit on their sibling, right? This is literally the thing, the dynamic that we just talked about, that children and siblings within these family systems will be positively reinforced for weaponizing their relationship with one of the other siblings in order to best suit primary caregivers. There's no world where it's okay or acceptable for a parent to be like, thanks for publicly shitting on your brother for me. It made me feel so good. And obviously that's the goal here. That's the whole point of all of this. And so like, high five. Thanks for doing that. That's fucked up. That's so beyond fucking dysfunctional. And I think it's also illuminating that this was a moment that got filmed and put on TV. This is also something that happens a lot in dysfunctional family systems, where the dysfunction gets to the degree that the family system normalizes it and thinks that this is like perfectly normal and acceptable behavior. And it's not, right? Being comfortable enough to display this amount of dysfunction to the public is really a red flag. Again, if you notice this stuff happening within your own family system, please know that you're very valid in like, you know, whatever degree of no contact or low contact you want to pursue with people, because we're going to talk about that later. But again, we're going to talk later about the concept of homeostasis so that hopefully we can paint a little bit of a clearer picture. Let's do that now, actually. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk to you about is this concept of moving goalposts. This happens a lot within dysfunctional family systems, and it sucks if you've ever been on the receiving end of this problematic behavior. It's very, very overwhelming and like irritating, honestly. There's a lot of anger, I think, like in a very valid way that comes up for folks about having been subjected to this type of behavior. Essentially what I'm referring to is that within these family systems, it's not uncommon for there to be a desire to put somebody in the role of scapegoat. Obviously with the Plath family, we see this happen first with Mariah. She talks openly, regularly about having been the black sheep of the family. But we also see it happen with Ethan and Olivia later, who are like the defectors from the family system, right? There is this desire to keep these people in this role of scapegoat. And so what we'll see happen then is these moving goalposts, right? We saw this happen again and again with Ethan and Olivia, that like initially the frustration was that Ethan and Olivia, you know, they aren't allowed to be around our kids because their values are like too radical. They're too out there. And so, you know, we just wish that they would be, you know, more transparent. If they would just let us, you know, like observe them with the kids or whatever, then this would be fine, right? And so then there's an acquiescing that happens. Except that that's not good enough now anymore, right? It's not good enough. And so there's this whole like kerfuffle that happens in the driveway. And what we see again and again throughout like the progression of this season or series rather, is that every time there's an expectation or a gauntlet thrown down about how Ethan and Olivia are doing things wrong and the way to fix it is X, Y, or Z, eventually there's like some amount of compromise or acquiescing that happens only for people to turn around. Usually it's Kim and Barry to turn around and be like, no, actually that's not good enough now, right? It's not okay for Olivia to not want to have a relationship with Kim, because if she could just like talk with her and get it over with and, you know, couldn't she just be around her and that would be fine? And then they decide to be around the family at like this river thing, and that's not good enough either. Right now, you're not being nice enough, or you're not talking to us enough, or you're not doing it the right way, or you're not doing it the way that we think you should, or you're not doing it often enough. If you've ever been on the receiving end of these very nitpicky behaviors, you'll know what I'm talking about. Please know that you're very valid in feeling like, why can't I win here? Like, what the fuck? It's because in families that have this desire to put someone in this scapegoat role, it's often to maintain something that's called homeostasis. In like the family systems therapy world, homeostasis refers to a family system's desire to maintain equilibrium, essentially. Oftentimes what this looks like is trying to sort of pop people back down into their predetermined roles. So if you grew up being the golden child and go through a phase where you want to be like messy and you want to be the black sheep of the family, often there's going to be a concerted effort from multiple people within the family system to be like, no, right? Like a very whack-a-mole kind of way of like, sit down, like sit back down in your seat. You don't get to do that. That's not how this works, because if we're not all playing our role reliably, predictably within this family system, then it all goes to shit, right? It's all very confusing. I describe this to my clients a lot as though family systems are all doing this very coordinated and sophisticated dance routine with one another, where we all have this role, this like, you know, set of steps that we're supposed to perform. And when someone doesn't do that, then the whole dance routine gets fucked up. And so everybody in the family is like, hey, what the fuck, right? You stepped on my foot, or you got in my way, and we ran into each other, and now it's all a kerfuffle. It's a problem, right? And so this is where this feeling of chaos comes from within family systems. When somebody steps outside of this predetermined role, or this role that we've become, used to within a family system, it creates all kind of fuckery. And so this is why people will do things like these moving goalposts, where we'll say, we're only being mean to you, or we're only shitting on you because you're the black sheep of the family. And so if you would, just do X, Y, or Z, if you would just, be better, be nicer. Often for folks who are labeled as like the scapegoat in the family, this will look like not achieving things, right? If you were the kid who had like behavioral or educational or emotional regulation problems in childhood, the party line is usually like, well, if you would just be better at managing your emotions, if you would just be better at school, if you would just achieve more like your older siblings, right? Except that then you do those things and it's not good enough. Again, this is the thing where like, well, you didn't do it well enough, right? You didn't achieve high enough, or you're not doing it often enough, or you're only doing it because I told you to and not because you want to, and so now it doesn't count anymore. This kind of moving goalpost thing is often an attempt to maintain homeostasis. And I want to be clear about this too, that like, from an organizational or like an organism perspective, it makes sense, right? When we zoom out and we analyze a family system as like an ecosystem almost, it makes sense logically. And families aren't an ecosystem, like not in a literal sense, right? Like the people, you guys are whole ass human people. And so while it can make sense when we zoom out and look at it from a bird's eye view, that doesn't take away from how painful this is as a lived experience, as an individual, to sit through this experience of having your family tell you your love and approval and belonging in our family is conditional and contingent on you meeting expectations A, B, and C. And then you meet them and your family says, I'm not good enough, I'm moving the goalpost over here. It continually puts you in this place of having to chase a sense of legitimacy, a sense of belonging, and a sense of love and approval from your family of origin, which is fucked up. That's not how love and attachment is supposed to work. And this is why moving outside of a dysfunctional family system can feel really scary for folks, because it causes us to confront these difficult beliefs that we have about ourselves. For example, I'm not worthy of love if I'm not being the family hero, or if I'm not being the family barometer, if I'm not being the person who placates everybody else's emotions, right? That's a very difficult thing for us to sit with. And so I do also want to be clear, even though we're talking about the concept of homeostasis from like an organism view, this is still a very difficult and traumatizing thing to live through, because like you're a person and not just an organism, We talked earlier about how this behavior can feel so enraging and confusing to be on the receiving end of, because this is oftentimes folks who present to therapy after an issue like this will feel like, is it me? Like, what the fuck? Like, why can't I win? Surely there must be something wrong. And there's also a pretty high crossover with folks who feel this like pathological need to over-explain themselves. If this happened to you in childhood, you might notice in adulthood that you have this habit of over-explaining and wanting to super duper in detail explain things to people because you were made to feel as though you were being chronically misunderstood in childhood. The truth is that people probably did understand you and they were just choosing to be willfully ignorant. But this does a number on our attachment, right? And it makes it really difficult for us to feel like we can idle down in a relationship. So that's where a lot of this behavior comes from. The other thing about this that I want to draw your attention to is the hypocrisy that happens here. This is like very much on display in the Plath family. The example that comes to mind is that in the later part of the series, there is a lot of to-do about how if Olivia would just talk to Kim and Barry, if Olivia would just, get over it and like stop being so dramatic, stop bringing up drama, if you could just keep it light, right? Keep it light, keep it fun, keep it breezy, then we could all be fine and everything would be okay. Except that when Mariah decides that she's mad at Ethan, everyone in the family system is totally okay with Mariah blocking Ethan and not giving him an explanation about that, not giving any kind of concrete timeline for when she plans to have any formal conflict resolution with him. And so while it's not okay for Olivia to draw a hard line in the sand about wanting to be no contact with somebody who, by her admission, was like pretty traumatizing to her, it is okay for Mariah to draw this line in the sand and to go no contact with this person who harmed her. And so this hypocrisy is like very crazy making for a lot of people, right? It's really, really upsetting and again, destabilizing to be on the receiving end of, because the feeling is like, what the fuck, right? What are the rules here? Like, what are the rules? What are the expectations expectations, and why do they seem to situationally only apply to particular people? Again, this is part of the family dysfunction. Okay, I have some more clips to show you from this show. Let me pull those up now.
I don't mean to speak for you or you, but I have a hard time understanding why it affects you so much.
I probably need to answer that first for myself of why it affects me so much, but I think it's because I feel like I'm trying to support from an empty bucket.
You don't have to support or him or her.
It's not like we need you to be like, yay, go see your mom. You know, like not like you don't have to overly support us. Just be like, I guess don't make it feel like.
Understanding where we're at.
Yeah, don't make it feel like it's not okay for us to choose that.
It doesn't have to be so complicated. I feel like the more complicated you make it, the harder it is going to be to understand it and resolve it. Grudges don't do you any good. They actually really hurt you.
My boundary is not based on a grudge I have, and I just want to make that clear.
That I want to contrast with this moment.
Mariah, when we were in Europe, you guys put out the social media post. Me and Olivia were very upset about it, and we were not going to talk to you guys.
Olivia can't expect to tell that story and lie.
What did Olivia lie about?
And then expect us to not speak
Mariah,
up
what did Olivia lie
just
about?
The credit card thing.
What-
That's not true.
Yes, it is. You cannot use someone else's credit card. Have you ever asked Olivia the whole story of what happened when I told Mom no, and then Mom wanted to talk to Olivia, and then Olivia told her no?
I just think that the whole thing's really messed up. Or family. Why is it this way? It's stupid. It's been years.
Yeah, well, it looks like a continuous thing of people not talking to each other, but talking to other people about each other.
This will also be relevant. Again, we're going to come back to this clip in a minute. Actually, hold on. I want to check something. Okay, before we talk about moving goalposts, we're going to go back and talk about something. Just cut this back in. I'll, help you.
Yeah.
With where it's meant to
We're
go.
just taking this section and moving it somewhere else, basically. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Moving on. One other clip that I want to show you in this section is, again, to just highlight that oftentimes in these dysfunctional family systems, there's a good amount of hypocrisy happening. In the same breath that Micah blames Olivia for speaking about people but not speaking to people, we also have this happen.
Olivia texted me. She wants me to meet up with her, try to clear the air, and she wants it to just be the two of us.
So again, I just want to be clear. The accusation was you're talking about people and not talking to people, right? We as a family should be talking to people in order to resolve our issues. So Olivia reached out to do just that.
What do you want to do? I mean, I think it would be great for you guys to talk. I'm not sure what it would accomplish. I feel like there's nothing to lose. If anything, it's just going to be the same. If it's drama, then just, I guess, walk away from it. I mean, I'm down to talk if we can all do it. I don't really want to be the only one there. First off, I'm only up here for a day, basically, before I go back. I don't really see the point of trying to clear the air because I don't think anything will be cleared.
Ultimately, the decision that Micah ends up making is that he doesn't want to meet with Olivia at all unless Olivia agrees to keep it light and hang out at a bar with him and Ethan. Effectively, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have conflict resolution with you. So unless you can play pretend and not be upset and not want to have a one-on-one direct conversation where we try to resolve the issues that we have, I'm not going to talk with you. Which is, again, the moving goalpost thing, right? We talked this point to death, I think, but I do just want to be clear that, this is what it looks like to have people, especially in the conflict avoidant family systems where there's a lot of fixation with being cool and calm and easy breezy, and we're not upset, and we're also mature, and we're all being very adult about this, right? This often is labeled then when people do have feelings, when people are upset, you get labeled as being irrational, as being dramatic, right? That's not true. What actually is happening here is that there is a person who's willing to be honest and willing to be truthful about their emotions and about their issues and is wanting to resolve things directly and not wanting to do the play pretend thing where we all pretend as a family system that we're all totally fine and completely unbothered by the degree of dysfunction that exists here. This is why people get put in this role of identified patient. I think it's also worth pointing out in this moment too, we talked about homeostasis and how people often get put back into their roles, right? In this moment, a lot of what's happening is that Olivia has been cast in this scapegoat role, which has allowed Mariah to sort of temporarily move outside of that. This does sometimes happen within family systems where people will swap roles. And especially, again, if you are a person who ends up being thrust into this role of scapegoat so that somebody else can swap, roles. This is why it feels so disarming and so overwhelming, because it's all of a sudden you've been thrust into this role so that it frees up space for someone to go somewhere else. And now you're identified patient, right? You're the problem. You're the reason that our family is dysfunctional, and you can't escape that role. This is why it feels so suffocating for folks to be stuck within these family systems that are dysfunctional and that are committed to the dysfunction. And this is why family systems who are dysfunctional to this degree protect their dysfunction, because it's the way that we know how to function and the way to exist with one another. So we can't let go of that. We have to stay this way, even though we might all be able to acknowledge privately to ourselves that we don't like it, that it doesn't feel good, that we'd prefer for things to be a different way. We cling to this sense of dysfunction because it's the sameness and the stability that we've come to know. And especially when there's chaos already within a family system, it's all too much for people to try to upheave these expectations and to do something completely different than what's been done in the past. There is one last thing that I want to talk with you about before we wrap up and talk about like moving forward and all of those kinds of things, being this moment between Ethan and Olivia where Ethan essentially throws down this gauntlet to say that if Olivia and he are going to continue having a relationship, that she needs to move back into this like trad wife role. So I'll show you that clip and then we'll talk about it.
One of the biggest things that could be done on your end to try to make this work would be to go back and try to mend your relationships with your family and try to get back to some of the roots and values that were instilled in you and how you grew up. I feel like you're searching for something that you haven't found that maybe is trying to take the place of that.
Essentially what Ethan is saying here is that you not abiding by the values and beliefs that my family does is creating conflict for me, because my family wants me to abide by those values and beliefs. You want me to abide by different values and beliefs, and I'm stuck in the middle. So the way that you could make this easier for me is, even if you don't really believe that, just pretend to abide by those values and beliefs so that my family will give us their temporary and conditional approval. This is kind of at the heart of the conversation about like, how do we leave dysfunctional family systems and what does that look like? And also, why does there seem to be so much back and forth? This is why, right? It's not uncommon for folks to take a few go rounds of being in and out of the dysfunctional family system before we find our sense of equilibrium, because the party line is often like, oh, we've grown, we've changed, right? Maybe somebody's gone to therapy just long enough to have like their emotions validated by a clinician, and then they leave when it's time for them to do their own accountability work, right? And so then there is this united front that gets presented of like, we're changing or things are better, and like that might not actually be true. It is possible for family systems to change, to be clear, especially when folks are committed to growth and accountability and all of those kinds of things. But it is fairly common, especially again when there's dysfunction to this degree, for there to be more so an attempt or a concerted effort to conceal the dysfunction just more effectively this time than it is for there to be like actual large scale growth. In terms of like moving forward and exiting a toxic family system or a dysfunctional family system, if this is happening to you, please know that using no contact, low contact boundaries as a way to preserve your own sense of safety is a very valid thing, right? I think this is a lot of things, or a thing that a lot of folks in our age bracket are discovering and are choosing to enact in their own lives, and for good reason, right? It's exhausting trying to have these conversations in good faith with people who are committed to protecting the dysfunction of the family system. This is why it's also necessary for folks sometimes to be like, I'm choosing to invest my time and attention in a chosen family, in relationships that are willing to be open and transparent with me, that are willing to move and grow with me, rather than trying to re-immerse myself in this family environment that teaches me that love and approval is conditional. The other thing about this that can be really upsetting is that when you are entering into a conflict resolution with a family or a family member that's part of this dysfunctional system, and you're using all of these good faith attempts to be transparent, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to have good conflict resolution, to use like healthy boundaries and all of these things, oftentimes that effort will sort of fall flat, because again, these people are committed to, when we're in the throes of this dysfunction, we will be committed to protecting this sense of dysfunction, again, because of the homeostasis and the sameness thing. And so it can feel like, surely I'm not trying hard enough, right? Maybe I just am not being healthy enough. Maybe I'm not being nice enough. Maybe I'm not being clear enough. Maybe I should just try again. Maybe if I do it differently this time, then it will work out differently. I want to encourage you, especially if you've been around the block a few times and you're not finding that sense of relief, or your family system is not moving to a healthier place, to give yourself the freedom to say, It might not actually be me. It might not be me at all. And maybe there's not a world where I need to be nicer or kinder or more respectful or to voice it better. Or maybe if I just bring it up in the right circumstances this time. Sometimes the truth is that despite our best efforts, even when you bring all of your best intention and like your best behavior to the table and lay all of your cards face up with the best of intentions, that there are people who will just be committed for a variety of reasons, right? Sometimes it's self-protective. Sometimes it's just because we don't have the awareness that it's problematic yet. But those people will be committed to maintaining that status quo, regardless of whether it's dysfunctional or unhealthy. And it's not on you, right? It's not your job. It's not your obligation. It's not your life's work to teach or single-handedly save your family from their dysfunction. Your job as an individual is to care for you and to set limits and boundaries about things that feel safe for you, right? You deserve that. And if that means, again, going low contact or no contact, if that means investing in chosen family and friendships and relationships who are safe people for you, who are willing to hear your feedback and who are willing to enact all of the like best practice strategies about boundaries and conflict resolution and all of that, you're allowed to do that. You're not being mean. You're not being shitty. You're not being uncaring or unkind for calling it ultimately at the end of the day and saying, this is not on me, right? Especially for folks, those of us who've made repeated efforts to put your best foot forward, to be as kind and amenable as you can. Oftentimes what will end up happening in this situation when we try to be more and more and more amenable is that we end up getting sucked back into this family system because we get sold this lie, again, that like if you would just be nicer, if you would voice it better, if you would just let us have, this, X, Y, and Z things, then it would all be better. Then it would all be different this time. And this is, again, why people end up getting sucked back into family systems that are dysfunctional. And we have to take kind of our time and space to move through that realization gradually on our own. But just know, again, if you're choosing to draw that line in the sand, it doesn't make you a dick. It doesn't make you an asshole. And it also doesn't mean that you're not trying hard enough, right? Again, because sometimes we can use all of the best strategies and it will still fall flat, and that has nothing to do with you. If this is something that has happened to you, please know that you're very valid in feeling however you feel, and also in taking all of the time that you need to process and unpack these things, right? Especially for people who have come to the realization that like, oh, my family was actually pretty dysfunctional for like the entirety of my life. It takes a good while to process that. There's also very much a grieving process that takes place because we're having to mourn the loss of people, of a family system, of, this fantasy about a perfect, happy family that we may not ever have if the people that we love are, again, committed to protecting the dysfunction more than they're committed to having honest and open relationships with their actual family. And that takes time, right? That's difficult work to do. Also, for what it's worth, it's brave work to do. It's courageous to be the person who sits with the reality that like, this is fucked up. This is not okay. And I'm choosing to not perpetuate these values and this dysfunction in my own life and my own family moving forward. It's hard. It's scary. It's very much uncharted territory for a lot of people. So take the time that you need, especially if you have a good therapist who's able to walk you through and guide you through this process. There is no such thing as like you're, being dramatic about how you feel or, taking too long to process your trauma. It's not a thing that you're going to get graded on. At least it shouldn't be anyways. And you are entitled to take the time and the space that you need, especially after having survived something that is already so difficult in the first place. So big love to you. If you're working through that, please know that you're very valid and very seen, especially here. There's a pretty large community of folks who have also probably walked through similar things. And so we see you, and be kind to yourself. If you guys like the video, I can talk more about family system stuff. I know we haven't done a dedicated video about family roles and those types of things. So if you want to see that, let me know. But otherwise, you can like the video. If you like the video, you can subscribe. We talk about stuff like this. We also do an educational pop culture moment. So I'd love to have you stay for that. And then share the video to help the channel grow and to help the channel grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.